Howdy folks, I'm Dan Gross and welcome to this brand new Spotlight special for the Rochester Indie Musician Spotlight, Rochester's premier music and interview show. Yeah, I wasn't expecting to see you so soon again either, but this is a project we've been working on for a really long time, so we wanted to clue you in. Fans of the show will recognize this as Dave Chisholm, the front man of Talking Underwater. We had him all the way back on in season 3. That was a year, over a year ago, man.
8 years ago.
Feels like it at this point. But anyway, a lot of you know this, but Dave is an incredibly, in addition to being a very nice and humble guy, an incredibly talented dude, and he's finished this project, Instrumental, a 220-page graphic novel, and he's taking the music that he wrote and recorded for that to the stage this Fringe Festival.
Yeah, so it's a graphic novel, like a big comic book, with a soundtrack of music.
Exactly.
And at the Fringe Fest, we'll be performing all of the music live while the artwork from the book is projected.
Perfect. So
on a ginormous screen that's going to be hanging above the musicians.
That's going to be a lot of fun.
It's going to be pretty cool.
And some details before we go too far into the interview here. So this, during Fringe Festival, is Wednesday, September 19th at 6 p.m. One set only, just want to make sure. Tickets are $10. If you're interested, you can go on Fringe Fest's website to find out more information. And joining Dave, it'll be Dave on trumpet. Yes, of course, he plays other instruments. Colin Gordon on saxophone, Chris Potter on guitar, Matt Curley on keys, Dave Klug on bass, and Matt Bevan Perkins on drums. It's pretty much normal people. Aaron Sabell, normal people, plus Dave and...
Minus Aaron.
Well,
plus Matt.
Right, plus Matt. So it's a substitute on drummer. So man, let's get into this. This is something that I loved reading, I loved listening to, and this is my pleasure. And it is such a unique project. I'm so happy we're getting to talk about it. So the last time you came on the Spotlight, we talked about a little bit about comics, but more of your origins in the music side of things. So why don't we talk about your origin in the comic book?
My origin story.
There, you see how I did that?
Yeah, origin. So comics have always been a huge part of my life. My mom, to this day, claims that my first word was Spider-Man, which is obviously a lie. So,
it's a charming lie, if it is.
And I've always made comics ever since I was 3 years old. I made a comic called World of the Robots back then. It was exactly like the same thing as Transformers. And it's something I guess I've kept a foot in that world, all throughout my music career and education and everything. And I did a book after I did my bachelor's degree. I toured around with a rock band for a little while, and then when that went south, I was really frustrated, and so I wrote a book. I decided to you know what, I want to make something where I don't have to rely on anybody else to do it. So I made a book called Let's Go to Utah, and it kind of found a cult following online and became sort of like a weird, well, to me it felt like a hit comic. Right. Looking back on it now, it's not very good, but
in your personal opinion anyway.
Yeah, and when I finished that book, I was working on my master's degree, and I kind of had this idea for a follow-up for over the course of my master's degree and my doctorate here at Eastman, and about a trumpet that kills people. And so that became like a seed in my brain that just sort of took root and took hold. And over the course of those 5 years, when I was in school, I was kind of plotting this story out in my head the whole time, kind of looking for little bits of information here and there that I could take and put in the story.
Yeah.
And
so we'll continue the story of Instrumental, and we'll put this all back chronologically. But let's backtrack a little bit. You said you were always making comics when you were younger. As an artistic person, I'm sure that was just kind of felt like a natural outlet for you. But can you say what inspired you to start making comics, or what comic book artists inspired you to start making?
It's hard because I think that there have been several stages of inspiration. You know, initially it was only about Spider-Man. And all the characters, all of the Marvel characters and DC characters, and then I would say it didn't take too long for it to become about the artist. So when I was really young, I loved the typical artists that kids would people who are my age, Todd McFarlane and Jim Lee and all the guys who started Image Comics and stuff. And then I got really into like Japanese comics, like Akira, right? You can see the book on the shelf right there.
I can't see it from here.
It's anyway. So it's still, and that became like a really deep like period of education for me, is like learning about Akira, and then discovering all kinds of amazing writers like Alan Moore and Grant Morrison and like Warren Ellis, and sort of like diving into all of these like layers, and European artists like Mobius and stuff. And so, you know, it just keeps like it just keeps
feeding itself.
And now I look back on maybe the people who were my first inspirations, and I'm like, well, it's kind of like not the best stuff ever, but I still kind of like love it on a nostalgia level.
Right. And something I find interesting in that is like we're missing some of the more typical names that you think like would inspire maybe some young comic book artists like Bill Kane or Stan Lee or Jack Kirby. Like some of like the really big names.
I think
like those are implied.
Yeah, I think like Jack Kirby especially is someone who is really near and dear to my heart as well. But I don't think it would be honest to say that he was an influence when I was really young and stuff like that.
Right. You were more drawn to some stuff that was a little
like
edgier,
flashy
and
and new, and like the like late 80s and early 90s and stuff like that.
You mean around the Image Comics time?
Yeah, like
something like that.
When it started out.
And something you said that I really love, and complete disclaimer, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Dave a number of times on a variety of subjects, so we're going to be talking about stuff that we've chatted about before, so we'll rope you back into the conversation here. But something that you always say that I really enjoy is two things. The first is, you said, having a foot in both worlds. And the other one is, do you discuss how your life is kind of these series of like these huge shifts in concentration. At one point, it's all about music.
Yeah.
And then it's all about the comics. And then it's all about the music and all about the comics. So can you talk about how those things meld together and how they kind of became instrumental, if you can?
Yeah. You know, a funny story, man. Like, I tabled at Heroes Con in Charlotte, like a Comic Con in Charlotte. And I was chatting with this like random comic book artist about my project, and like he was like, "Oh, do you do more cons?" And I was like, "No, because I teach music on weekends." And I was like, "You know, music is like my work, and I'm educated in music." And he was like, "Well, you can only really choose one thing." And I was like, really taken aback. Like, first off, like I just met you, like, and you're throwing shade at me, you know. And second, like. I guess I disagree,
right?
You know, but I think I'm unique in that way that like I'm really fortunate in that I have like that I'm good enough at these things that I can like use both of them to like pay the bills to an extent, and also that I'm fortunate enough to have work that like teaching music, private lessons and stuff like that is lucrative enough to like, you don't need to like be chained to like 60 hours a week of work, so that I have enough free time to put to making comics. Because making comics obviously takes a lot of time, as does learning guitar, as does learning trumpet and all this stuff. So I'm really fortunate, you know. I think that's the biggest thing, is that I'm really lucky. I grew up in a supportive household too for the arts. Obviously, I wouldn't be here if I hadn't. As far as instrumental goes with that answer, this is like a kind of a crappy answer. I wish there was some mystical, like amazing, like a beam of light hit me from space and I was like, this has to happen. But it was really more like marketing. It was like, I have this skill, music. I want to put together a comic project that only I can do. And I want to be able to pitch it to publishers and have a personal story behind it that's like this is the only book that's like this that's ever come out.
So far, that's been true.
And well, other books have had soundtracks, but it's never been all done by one person on such a unified kind of level. And so, as far as I know, I mean, who the hell knows, really? Like, someone online will be like, no. Anyway.
Anonymous troll, eh?
No, that's fine. But like, I wanted something that had a personal story, and I kind of like, also, I'm always fighting these demons that are similar to what Tom's fighting. And so a lot
Tom is the main character in Instrumental.
Right. And so a lot of the times for me, like, just like with songwriting, making comics is kind of like a way for me to kind of explore my own personal conflicts and stuff like that. And so yeah, I mean, it kind of came to be that way. And then I finished my work at Eastman, my doctorate, on February 7th. I finished the work on it, the big test, the big comp test, the scary test. And I had a routine set when I was studying for that was like study from 7:30 a.m. till like noon, and then study again in the evening. And the day after I took this test, I knew that I had passed it. I started work on Instrumental. I took the same routine and the same work ethic, and I just applied it to this book. And I finished it over the course of like really like 10 months, which is kind of like
unheard of.
Well, you know, it was a fevered time of hard work. Like,
right.
Yeah. So
we're joined by a couple feline visitors. That's why we're poking around. It's okay, making sure that no technology is knocked about. And I think that's an interesting comment about. I find that a very interesting parallel between how inspiration approached you, and then it approaches Tom in the book. In that for you had this regimented thing, and it took years of hard work, editing, putting in new stuff, recording it, and then Tom, he's just grinding. He's not happy where he is. I mean, obviously, you heard in the beginning a trumpet that kills people, so we know there's a plot twist in there. But he's given this magic talisman, and all of a sudden he can play. That's an interesting parallel to me.
Yeah, well, I don't think I've killed anyone with my playing. Come to the Lyric Theater,
and
we'll find out.
Death by Instrumental. Instrumental's in all caps, so it'll make for a good headline at the very least. And then talking about Instrumental itself, so you mentioned how some comics have soundtracks, but this is the first thing that's unified. So we'll break down the comic a little bit more and some of the storytelling rules that you used and the way...
We don't have to get into that.
Yes, we do, Dave. We'll touch on it, I promise.
Okay.
But in terms of the music... So this is music that you composed, arranged, and put together. Why don't you... Hello. It's nice to meet you, too. Why don't you tell us about that process and getting the music out there?
I had a few kind of symbolic bits of symbolism that I wanted to put into the soundtrack that have to do with broad elements in the story. And... So basically, I wrote 7 tracks of music that were built around these. That were built around these symbolic. 7 tracks of music that were built around these symbolic, kind of like musical symbols. You know, there's like a tone row.
Right.
There's this like really unsettling drone that happens on a few tracks.
Kind of like each one had its own leitmotif that connected it to something in the story.
I think that's kind of, but I don't think it's as sophisticated as Wagner is. You know, sorry, this is gonna bug me. So yeah, so that's basically, and then it was just a matter of kind of like grinding out, figuring out cool like ways to tie more cool ways to tie all the tracks together. There's a few like rhythmic ideas that come back over the course of the soundtrack. And it was never about like illustrating each chapter beat by beat. It was more about capturing the overall mood of a chapter, or having some of the music is diegetic, which is to say that it's music that's like meant to be played by the band in the comic. So the comic is about musicians, and the band in the comic is the same instrumentation as the band on the album.
Right. It'd be like if you were watching a movie and you saw someone play a violin and you heard note for note what was happening. That's what diegetic music is.
Right.
And so talk about the sound of the album. I don't think anyone, like, it's mixed like a rock record. It's punchy, it's compressed, it's loud. But in the actual sound, Matt Bevan Perkins, shout out Matt, he said something like jazz metal or something. It's like edgy, but it's also jazz, and then it's complicated and harmonically. Can you talk about the sound of it?
It's kind of inspired. Well, it's like a follow up to my album Calligraphy that came before, and Calligraphy definitely had some like real kind of like philosophy behind the songs in the sense that I wanted to structure the songs around a very small number of what I call musical moments or like events, musical events, right? So to my ears, to my modern ears, typically when I listen to jazz, if I try to imagine what it's like to listen to jazz for like a modern person, it's just like brimming with events. There's like events that happen constantly in jazz music, and I feel like it can be exhausting if you're not kind of like raised in that world. And I wanted to make music that was still improvisational, still hopefully interesting, but in which the musical events were more spread out in the sense that like everything is working towards this moment. Instead of like this moment, this moment, this moment, this moment. Everything is working toward this one moment. To my ears, it's like there's a reason why Kind of Blue is the biggest selling jazz album of all time, and it's because the musical events on it are like spread out enough that like the layperson can understand it, and it has a nice vibe, and it's not frantic, and it doesn't sound like technical exercises. It just sounds like pretty melodies and beautiful melodies and mysterious song forms and stuff like that. And so this came out of that. This came out of that mindset. It's also really inspired by post-rock, like bands like Sigur Rós and Mogwai, stuff like that. Like largely instrumental kind of post-rock stuff, or where the voice is used as an instrument and everything. And
your voice is on the record, I believe, as well.
Yeah, it's on it a fair amount.
Yeah.
That's it.
And so why don't you tell us about how you'll translate the sounds of the album to the lyric theater stage?
It's gonna just slay. It's gonna be slaying.
Of course it's gonna slay.
The only thing is I added saxophone to the mix because the album is just like a lot of trumpet. It's a lot of
trumpet.
horn on face, and to be honest with you, like my trumpet chops, like I would have to be playing like 8 hours a day to be able to play this thing live. So Colin's there. Plus, Colin is like one of my best friends.
He's a cool dude too.
And he is also like, thankfully, one of the best saxophone players that I've ever heard. So obviously, it's easy to invite him to play along with this stuff, and it's gonna be great. It's gonna, everyone sounds amazing. We just rehearsed on Monday, and it's sounding so good, and yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Exciting. Now, before we do our follow-up, I did want to ask about this. We can keep this brief. But one of the things, we talk a lot about the music. Of course, this is a music show, and we're previewing a music concert. But one of the things that is fascinating about instrumental, and how maybe to both someone who is very learned in comics, has read a lot of comics, and maybe some of this is a little bit more new to them, is two things. The first is the way you play with the page and the frame, and how up until a certain point of the story, everything has its role. It's always in the frame, it's always in the box. And the other is how you convey time and the passage of time throughout the comic. Would you mind breaking those two things down for us, and then we'll get to our wrap-up?
Okay, so basically the one of the advantages of comics is that like it's really bound by rules, right? So like as a storyteller, it sounds like a weird thing to say because artists hate rules, right? We love to be like free and everything. But when you start writing a story, if you set up a sense of normal, you can then upset that sense of normal when something extraordinary happens. And the great thing about comics is the formality of it is so apparent to the reader. It's so apparent that like this box and then this box and this box, and there's all this white space in the areas between the boxes. And when something changes with that formality, it's apparent. And like in my favorite comics, it always means something. It feels like that's a moment when a panel comes out that's not the same as the other panels. It should be like emphasizing something in something in the story. And so with instrumental, I had a set of rules that were like the maximum number of panels per tier is 2. Maximum number of per tiers is 4. So maximum number of 8 panels per page. Panels are always rectangular. They're never weird shaped or circular or anything. Characters never break panel borders. So everything is bound within the panel. And then when Tom plays the trumpet, all of the rules are thrown out the window, or not necessarily, but they're bent. So he'll be standing out of a comic page, and the comic page will be warped as part of almost like an optical illusion in the art, and to show that, to maybe perhaps imply that like when he plays the trumpet, weird things are happening with regards to time, because the gutters represent the passage of time in comics. And I think that gets to your second question with how to deal with time. And I think the way I deal with it is pretty normal for the way comics deal with time. You put the time passages in the gutter. There's no other option, I don't think.
Right.
Maybe I'm not creative enough. And so then the real crux is like listeners then hopefully become like aware of the passage of time when the music is playing, and music is in a finite time capsule, and then the book is happening, and the book is an infinite space for them. They can sit and explore as much as they want. And then the music, and so that dissonance between these two is hopefully reflected by Tom playing the trumpet and creating a rift in time and stuff like that.
Beautiful answer.
So that's great.
And let's get to the wrap up. So this book came out in 2017.
Yeah, that's right.
I know, it's crazy. And that's the crux of this question, is that here we are in late 2018. You're still going to comics. You're still Comic-Cons. You're still playing the music. You're still selling books. It's still being talked about. What does it mean to you to produce something that, in the news world, we say has legs, that is kept going, that is still sustaining, it still feels new, and people are still excited about it?
I guess like if you just pull back far enough, then nothing has legs, right? So everything's temporary. That's kind of a lame answer. I think this book and this music is some of the coolest stuff I've done. I'm really happy with it. I'm really happy with the reception it's gotten. It's been a nice shot in the arm for me to have a work that connects with people. And it's been like modestly successful in that regard. And so yeah, I mean, it's really inspired me to make some more comics. So that's basically the deal, is that I'm like continue to like ride a wave of like momentum for making comics. And so I'm working on some stuff now. That's pretty cool. So. And
we will paste a little link here right at the bottom so you can check out Dave's website. But in the meantime, if you want to share this wonderful experience with Dave and check out the music of Instrumental one more time for you at the Rochester Fringe Festival, September 19th, 6 p.m., $10 ticket if you're so inclined. And you can watch the instrumental band, which by no coincidence is all instrumental. Dave on trumpet, Colin Gordon on saxophone, Chris Potter on guitar, Matt Curley on keys, Dave Klug on bass, and Matt Bevan Perkins on drums. Dan Gross, Dave Chisholm, thank you so much for watching this very spontaneous Spotlight special for the Rochester Indie Musician Spotlight. And Season 6 will be with you soon.
Thanks. All right. Bye.